Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Tenyola Shoboale. On the program this week, world leaders gather in Glasgow, Scotland for COP26 summit, pledge to end deforestation by 2030 and curb methane emissions. World leaders at the COP26 climate summit agreed on two significant advances on climate change this week: promises to curb methane emissions and a deal to end deforestation by 2030. However, progress still fell short of securing aggressive commitments to reach net zero carbon emissions globally and to slow the rise in temperatures that have led to lethal fires, floods, droughts, and heat waves around the world.
The UN COP26 climate summit opened on Sunday, billed as a make-or-break chance to save the planet. But as one summit began, another ended. The G20 in Rome, which highlighted doubts and anger over whether years of empty pledges would turn into political momentum. COP26 aim is to keep alive the target of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which scientists say is our only hope of averting catastrophe.
The IPCC report in August was a wake-up call for all of us. It made clear that the lights are flashing red on the climate dashboard. That report, agreed by 195 governments, makes clear that human activity is unequivocally the cause of global warming.
On Monday, the summit opened with a warning from leaders, including UN Secretary-General, the UK Prime Minister and Britain's Prince Charles.
Our addiction to fossil fuels is pushing humanity to the brink. We face a stark choice. Either we stop it or it stops us. And it's time to say, enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
Having myself had the opportunity of consulting many of you over these past 18 months, I know you all carry a heavy burden on your shoulders, and you do not need me to tell you that the eyes and hopes of the world are upon you, to act with all dispatch and decisively, because time has quite literally run out.
Humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
For any chance of success, COP26 needs to secure far more ambitious emission pledges and lock in billions in climate finance for poorer countries. Starting on a promising note, more than 100 global leaders pledged to halt and reverse deforestation and land degradation by the end of the decade.
So it is first my pleasure.
The promise, made in a joint statement, was backed by leaders of the countries including Brazil, Indonesia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which collectively account for 85% of the world's forests.
Conserving our forests and other critical ecosystems is an indispensable piece of keeping our climate goals within reach, as well as many other key priorities that we have together. I am announcing a new plan to conserve global forests, which will bring together a full range of U.S. government tools, diplomatic, financial, and policy, to halt forest loss, restore critical carbon sinks, and improve land management.
The move was welcomed by many, but observers say action has to follow.
My take on the commitment to end deforestation is that the world leaders have to commit to these claims and they have to follow through, because we haven't seen any follow through. It's been years of committing to ending emissions by 2050, and now we see that India is pushing for 2070.
We absolutely need to get down on the ground and work with indigenous peoples and local communities, take account of their needs and connect the dots, because one of the reasons why people cut down trees is simply because they need a livelihood. So we have to look at this through a livelihoods perspective at least as much as through an environmental perspective.
Well, it's great that they actually agreed on that. I mean, it's a big step forward, but I think it's a bit problematic that it's in 10 years. We need action now.
On day 2 of the summit, the US and the EU also announced a global partnership to cut emissions of greenhouse gas methane by 2030. Methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases and responsible for a third of current warming from human activities. More than 100 countries signed up to the initiative. But China and Russia, 2 of the world's biggest methane emitters, did not sign the methane pledge.
The science is clear. We know
the absence of the Chinese, Russian, and Brazilian presidents has led to questions about how effective the summit will be in curbing global warming. But for leaders of some of the world's biggest economies and emitters present at the summit, they took stage to announce pledge and call for further action.
We'll cap oil and gas sector emissions today and ensure they decrease tomorrow at a pace and scale needed to reach net zero by 2050. That's no small task for a major oil and gas producing country. It's a big step that's absolutely necessary.
First of all, we have to give strong commitments to reduce emissions by 2030. Net zero by 2050 is good, but it's not enough. We need real action during this decade now. For Europe's this minus 55% at least, implemented and delivered. Second, we need to agree to a robust framework of rules, for example, to make global carbon markets a reality. Put a price on carbon. Nature cannot pay that price anymore. Number 3, we must mobilize climate finance for supporting vulnerable countries to adapt and leapfrog to clean growth.
It will be our scientists, our technologists, our engineers, our entrepreneurs, our industrialists and our financiers that will actually chart the path to net zero. And it is up to us as leaders of governments to back them in. Technology will have the answers to a decarbonised economy, particularly over time, and achieve it in a way that does not deny our citizens, especially in developing economies, their livelihoods or the opportunity for a better quality of life. Driving down the cost of technology and enabling it to be adopted at scale is at the core of the Australian way to reach our target of net zero emissions by 2050 that we are committing to at this COP26.
The host of the summit, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, said on Tuesday that he was cautiously optimistic.
On the way to the G20 in Rome, I said to some of you on the plane that if this was a football match, then the current score would be 5-1 down in the match between humanity and climate change. And I think what you could say today, after 2 days of talks with around 120 world leaders, is that we've pulled back a goal, or perhaps even 2. And I think we're going to be able to take this thing to extra time, because there's no doubt that some progress has been made. But I think we can be confident about one thing in the days ahead, the couple of weeks we've got. The clock on the doomsday device that I talked about is still ticking. But we've got a bomb disposal team on site, and they're starting to snip the wires, I hope some of the right wires. And my message to them, to the negotiators, is very simple. The leaders of the world may have left or are leaving COP now, but I can tell you that the eyes of the world, the eyes of the populations of the world are on you, and the eyes of the British government and all the other governments that care about this are on our negotiators, and we have your numbers. Thank you.
While there may be no big breakthrough on reducing overall emissions at COP26, organizers say the smaller, targeted agreements on protecting rainforests, cutting methane, and helping vulnerable island states add up to significant progress in tackling climate change. World leaders have returned home, and their teams of negotiators will now decide the fate of the summit, and many scientists say the future of planet Earth hangs in the balance.
The issue of whether wealthy industrialized countries should pay for the damage already caused by climate change is a key sticking point at the COP26 talks. Taking the stage at the summit, President Muhammadu Buhari said Nigeria is committed to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2060. He also told international partners to help fund renewable energy and gas projects in Africa.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, while highlighting the impact of climate change on the Lake Chad and northern Nigeria, said attaining the global climate goal will require the financial support to developing countries.
In a bid to commit to transitional change through climate policy, the revised national policy on climate change was approved in June 2021. This will enable us to implement mitigation measures and also strengthen adaptation towards a sustainable climate-resilient development pathway in Nigeria. Mr. President, I would like to state that attaining national and global climate change goals will require adequate and sustained technical and financial support to developing countries. In Nigeria, in the area of energy access, Nigeria's commitment to a just transition is reflected in our ambitious energy compact, which includes the government's flagship project to electrify 5 million households and 25 million people using decentralized solar energy solutions. This is a major step towards closing our energy access deficit.
African leaders criticized the world's wealthier nations at the COP26 summit for their failure to deliver a promised $100 billion a year to help developing countries tackle the impact of climate change.
We're naturally very disappointed by the failure of the wealthy nations to honor their commitments of making available $100 billion annually to the poorer countries to assist us in the fight against climate change, and by the unavailability of the technology transfer that will help us find sustainable ways of charting a path out of this existential crisis. Those same nations are, however, insisting that we abandon the opportunity for rapid development of our economies. That would be tantamount to enshrining in the global community inequality of the highest order, a totally unacceptable conclusion.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the
COP26 aims to keep alive a target of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrialized levels. The G20 group of major industrial nations is responsible for around 80% of global greenhouse gases. But the increased intensity of heat waves, droughts, flooding and storms caused by a warming planet is overwhelmingly felt in Africa. Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa called on Western leaders to take more action.
It is most unfortunate that the impact of climate change is disproportionately borne by the vulnerable communities which have contributed the least to the current stock of atmospheric carbon. Vulnerable countries must therefore be capacitated to mitigate, adapt, and build resilience to climate change. The expectation is that major emitters will scale up mitigation action and show greater interest in adaptation.
Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan reminded countries that the effects of climate change made no distinction between a nation's power or wealth.
What we all ought to remember is when the drastic climate changes hit, It will choose no location, might or weak, poor or rich country. And so we call upon an urgent unlocking of a climate financing that will trigger planned targets and implementation of the NDC.
A recent UN report emphasized how Africa is especially vulnerable to the climate crisis. It painted a dire picture of millions more of some of the world's poorest people being exposed to extreme weather and the continent's economy shrinking as much as 3% by the middle of the century.
Thailand has become one of the first destinations in Asia to open up to tourists to rescue its battered economy. While the tourism industry has welcomed the move, there are concerns opening up will cause COVID numbers to spike again.
Before the global health crisis began, tourism accounted for more than a tenth of Thailand's GDP. Bangkok ranked at the top of most visited cities in the world. But in early 2020, the government imposed strict entry rules, in the process losing 3 million tourism-dependent jobs as well as an estimated $50 billion a year in revenue.
Special conditions, the corona kept me away from Thailand for 18 months, 1.5 years, and away from my Thai wife for 1 year. Yeah? So today is the day, the very first day, I took the chance to come back and yeah.
In Europe, as you know, it's quite cold, so we decided to go here. And it was just randomly picked the first flight. As we saw that it's reopened, we just picked this flight and were quite surprised that we were the first flight which arrived in Thailand.
It's not a complete reset yet, however. Tourists will still have to stay at a pre-approved hotel for their first night and test negative upon arrival before they can freely travel around the country.
So before flying, you need to apply for a COE. So you need to have your insurance, you need to have your quarantine booking. So right now there is only one night, so it's much easier than before. Before it was, at first it was 14 nights, then it dropped to 7 on only one night. So that's definitely easier if you want to go to Thailand.
Some big hotels have teamed up with hospitals to streamline the process by providing tests on site.
I think guests will love this. You know, what we've done is created a one-stop shop. So what we will do, we will organise a limousine to get them from the airport to the hotel, take them to check in, do the PCR test, and then they can go to the room. They wait in their room until their results come back, and then they're free to move around Bangkok as they wish.
Thailand is pushing ahead with reopening, even though it still has a sizable COVID problem. It says it can do so because vaccination rates are now high in tourist areas, and with the economy in tatters, it simply can't afford to wait any longer.
After 18 months of some of the world's strictest coronavirus border policies that ban citizens, unless granted an exemption, from coming back into the country, millions of Australians are now free to travel. But although the borders have been opened, only visitors who have been fully vaccinated and whose coronavirus tests are negative can now enter the country.
There were tearful reunions at the airport as family and friends reunited for the first time, with strict travel rules previously prohibiting many people from attending significant events, including weddings and funerals.
It's a pretty emotional day today. We lost my father-in-law last week, so it's happy feelings and sad feelings all at the same time, but so glad to see our family finally.
And this is the relief of we're finally here. It's been a long week, it's been a long 24 hours. We've been traveling for probably more than that now, and just the relief of seeing them. Sheer gut-wrenching sadness of why I'm here, but you know, you can't fault the fact that you're at least going to. I'm here, you know, so I'm so grateful for that.
It's great. It's so happy for the government that they decided to do this. I think it's a great decision in terms of opening everything up again.
It feels really good. I'm actually here for my dad's funeral. So I've been trying to come home for a year and a half.
The relaxation of travel rules is tied to rising vaccination rates, with more than 80% of people aged 16 and older in Australia's two most popular states, New South Wales and Victoria, as well as the Capital Territory, fully vaccinated. Australians and permanent residents living abroad may now return, but most tourists, even vaccinated ones, have to wait to come to the country. Unvaccinated travellers will still face quarantine restrictions, and all travellers need proof of a negative COVID-19 test prior to boarding.
We're not opening up to everyone coming back to Australia at the moment. I want to be clear about that. We're going to take this forward in a staged and careful way, as we've done all of these things. It's for the Commonwealth Government, the federal government, to decide when the border opens and shuts at an international level, and we will do that. In the first instance, it will be for Australians, Australian residents and their families. We'll see how that goes, and then we'll move to the other priorities, which I've already set out as being skilled migration, as well as students to Australia, and then we'll move on to the challenge of dealing with international visitors to Australia.
While the Delta outbreak kept Sydney and Melbourne in lockdowns for months until recently, Australia's COVID-19 cases remain far lower than many comparable countries, with just over 170,500 infections and 1,735 deaths.
Also opening up, vaccinated foreign tourists are now allowed to visit Israel as the country eased international border restrictions significantly for the first time since the start of the pandemic. The move is seen as a vital step to somewhat restoring Israel's tourism industry, which has been devastated by the pandemic and accompanying restrictions.
Tourists streamed through Israel's Ben Gurion airport on Monday as the country reopened its borders to some vaccinated foreign travelers.
I'm excited to be here after 4 years away.
I feel great. We all are so excited to be back in Israel. This is our homeland, and finally, after months of being away, we've returned.
The new rules allow for tourists who have received COVID booster shots to enter, but not if more than 6 months have lapsed since their last dose. There are some exceptions. Entry will be granted to travelers, including children, who recovered from COVID-19 in the 6 months prior. Anyone who recovered earlier will also be admitted if they received at least one vaccine dose approved by the WHO.
Actually, from today, the tourists can come here, and we are looking for them. It's about time that they will come here. We are waiting for them so much, and all this 1.5 years, it was a little bit empty here. And now, from the 1st of November, I think it's a new beginning.
Tourism dropped more than 80% last year after hitting a record high of 4.5 million visitors in 2019 that contributed $7.2 billion to Israel's economy.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates has eased restrictions after recording less than 100 new infections a day for 2 weeks. Our correspondent, Mayowa Adegoke, tells us more.
UAE is fast returning to normalcy, but government says wearing of face masks remain important alongside other precautions. Event season is back in full swing with the Expo 2020 and several other events holding across the country.
I feel so safe because everyone is taking precaution. People have masks and they are vaccinated. So I worry not.
Number of daily new infections have been below 100 in the last 2 weeks, a feat the government credits to the commitment of the people and its vaccination campaign.
I think now that the majority of people are getting vaccinated and like you enter Dubai, you need to have the PCR test. I think it's time that the country can open up a bit more and like people can have this exchange, because I think it was really missing the last years.
In a fresh ease on restrictions, local authority says more guests will now be allowed in weddings and other events held at home. 80% capacity of not more than 60 individuals are allowed to attend provided they have been vaccinated and they meet the Green Pass requirement through the dedicated COVID app. Attendees must also present a negative PCR test taken in 48 hours before the date of event.
I can't be more appreciated for everything happened during this crisis and their efforts, their great efforts to control it. There is mistakes, but we learn from mistakes. We can admit that there is mistakes. We learn from mistakes, and we also, alhamdulillah, achieved a great success, especially when you see this happen and all the people come and feel safe. Alhamdulillah.
Although roughly 88% of the overall population has been fully vaccinated, residents who took other vaccines aside Pfizer are encouraged to take booster shots to strengthen their immunity.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time. But remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. Stay safe.